Cuphead was doomed to fail. With an art style that appeals to children, a difficulty level that became a meme, and an inexperienced dev team comprised mostly of two brothers and their family, it never should have worked. But against all odds, it did. So what happened? Did the Moldenhauer brothers make a deal with the devil? Canadian indie developer studio MDHR released Cuphead in 2017. The side-scrolling run-and-gun was widely praised for its stunning animation, jazzy soundtrack, and satisfyingly difficult bosses. In short, Cuphead is a great game that absolutely rocked the gaming industry to its core. But most importantly, it proved that massively ambitious and artistically unique games are worth putting time and money into. But Cuphead's popularity was not always a given. To understand the game's present, we really have to dive into its past. MDHR co-founders Chad and Jared Moldenhauer always dreamed of making a game together. Since they were kids, they were enamored with the idea, and in 2010, after seeing the success of indie darling Super Meat Boy, they decided to give it a real shot. The brothers started working on their game remotely from separate provinces in their spare time, learning the art of game making as they went along. What began as a casual, fun, and experimental project quickly became something much more serious. They enlisted the help of their wives, cousins, and friends throughout the process, essentially outsourcing to other creative people when the brothers' own skills didn't measure up to the level of quality they wanted for their game. As development progressed over the years, they put out several trailers, but the one that changed everything was the one they released at E3 2015. From the silent film-inspired intertitles to the instantly iconic look and sound of the game, Cuphead was unlike anything else at E3 that year, which attracted quite a few interested eyes. Suddenly, this little side project was getting press coverage. A lot of it. And the Moldenhauers wanted to make sure that their game lived up to the hype. So, in an effort to chase their dream, Jared quit his full-time job at their family's construction company, and both brothers remortgaged their houses. They used the money to finance additional development on Cuphead and hire more people to the growing MDHR studio. Calling this risky doesn't even begin to cover how bold of a move it actually was. Plenty of indie games get hyped up at E3 and other conventions, only to fall by the wayside upon release, due to bigger, more impressive titles coming out around the same time. If Cuphead couldn't beat the odds, the brothers could find themselves in financial ruin. This was a dangerous road they were walking, one full of uncertainty, evolving creative visions, and financial gambles. Oh, and not to mention that Chad and Jared Moldenhauer were fighting against the current of the gaming industry every step of the way. See, what MDHR did was far from industry standard. If the Moldenhauer brothers had pitched Cuphead to a AAA studio, they probably would have been laughed out of the building, especially in the 2010s when the idea was first conceived. The Moldenhauers would eventually create Cuphead using a blend of charming traditional hand-drawn animation, watercolor backgrounds, physical props, and digital character coloring. But during the early days of development, it took turns in many different creative directions. In an interview with GameSpot, the Moldenhauers revealed that one version of Cuphead was inspired by elementary school arts and craft projects. It would have been a mix of normal animation and stop motion. The main characters went through countless redesigns, and level ideas were totally up in the air. But the 1930s rubber hose style pioneered by iWorks and further defined by Fleischer Studios had always been in the back of their minds. The Moldenhauers are lovers of classic animation, and doing a game in that style was floated around mostly as a joke. After all, art director and one-man animating team Chad Moldenhauer had no formal animation training. The workload would have been insurmountable, and at the time of development, Fleischer Studios was mostly remembered for being silly, over the top, and deeply racist. But then they decided to go with it anyway. In the words of Jared Moldenhauer,
the 30s style spoke to us more, and we were like, if we're going to put in all the work, we may as well go with something we're more interested in.
So Chad had his work cut out for him. Mirroring a famous style while simultaneously distancing yourself from its past is not an easy thing to do, and the Moldenhauers were very vocal about taking the technical artistic merit of the era while leaving all the garbage behind. Most established game studios would balk at the idea of hand-drawing an entire game due to the sheer amount of time and effort it would take to do so, never mind doing it all in an outdated and unpopular style with a problematic history. Not Chad and Jared Moldenhauer, though. But the 1930s are not the only time period that Cuphead harkens back to. The side-scrolling 3-man per level gameplay was directly inspired by games like Contra, Metal Slug, and even Super Mario Bros. Similarly to the way that the Moldenhauers chose Cuphead's animation style, they settled on making a run-and-gun for no other reason than because they liked them. The Moldenhauers knew they wanted to create a game that felt like it was straight out of the 80s and early 90s, something true to the arcade era both in its controls and in its difficulty. But that arcadey feel wasn't exactly seen as profitable to game studios in the 2010s, when gritty realism was on the rise. And while Cuphead looks like a children's cartoon from a bygone era, it's so notoriously challenging that playing it with young kids is virtually impossible. That's a game-destroying paradox that any normal studio would see as a huge red flag for Cuphead's marketability. Still, the Moldenhauers were undeterred. This speaks to their whole approach to making a game in the first place. Cuphead was born from a place of passion. Passion for animation, passion for games, and passion for the act of creating something. And that resulted in an unbelievable level of success. Within 2 weeks of release, Cuphead sold over 1 million copies and earned tens of awards for its game mechanics, style, and music. It became a merchandise magnet, spawning Funko Pop figures, plushies, board games, and countless other items that grace your local GameStop store shelves. And it even has its own Netflix TV show that aired in 2022, 5 years after the game's initial boom in popularity. Turns out the Moldenhauers weren't the only ones looking for a game like Cuphead. The game's special blend of stunning animation and challenging gameplay was a huge draw. Rather than being a marketing nightmare, Cuphead appealed to several corners of the larger gaming community. Those who pick up games based on aesthetics, those who play games for punishment, and those who are generally into the underutilized run-and-gun subgenre all came together to play Cuphead. And then there was a heap of new players showing up just to see what the hype was all about. According to the devs, this was an unintentional byproduct of development. They told GameSpot,
"We didn't set out to do that. It's almost like a side effect that the art style actually has drawn other people who would never play this type of game towards it and really like it."
But unintentional or not, this side effect has a huge impact on the game's popularity. And the Moldenhauers have their obsession with quality to thank for it. If Chad and Jared hadn't stuck to their guns and developed such an iconic style for the game, or if the gameplay and controls weren't as solid as they are, or if the music wasn't just right, Cuphead could have been seen as a cheap gimmick. But Cuphead is an incredible game. So whether a player was initially drawn to the look, the difficulty, the genre, or the hype, Cuphead's exceptional quality made players stick around. Every pixel on the screen radiates with the passion the devs have for their project, which is why it stands out as a shining example of why creativity and experimentation is so important in the gaming industry. Cuphead isn't the only hand-drawn indie out there. It may not even be the best one, but its story of self-discovery, perseverance, and massive risk is as unique as the art style that made it iconic. Cuphead never should have worked, but we live in a timeline where it did. And we have the Moldenhauers and their talented friends and family to thank for it. Thanks so much for sticking with this video all the way to the end. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to Nerdstalgic Gaming. While you're at it, let us know, do you love Cuphead? Or do you think it's overrated? Leave your thoughts in the comments.